if I'm peddling junk and I'm telling you guys go out and spend your hard-earned money on something that is of no good to anyone, then it's not gonna be very long before you quit watching my channel. If nobody watches my channel, then I don't get to do this. And I love this. Well, hey there, hobby homesteaders. Welcome back to Peaks Pete. My name's Lucas, and we're sharing our hobbies on 38 acres in eastern Kentucky. And today, I'm going to tell you everything that I've broken since I've owned a MechMaxx Sawmill. And I'm going to do it while I mill up this log. So guys, I have owned a MechMaxx Sawmill for about 8 months now. And actually, this particular sawmill is my second MechMaxx Sawmill. The first one that I had was an SM26, and I love the process of milling so much that I went ahead and upgraded to the SM32. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, part of why I'm making this video is because I am sponsored by MechMaxx, and they have provided these mills to me so that I can share my experiences with all of you. Now, that creates some understandable trust issues because if I'm provided a product by a company, that gives me incentive to say good things and not bad things. And so I have ran into more than a few commenters and viewers who are a little bit skeptical about whether they're getting the whole story. And they want to buy a sawmill. They see that this is the most affordable option out there, but they don't quite trust that this is going to be good enough. So I thought, what better way to help people decide whether the quality is good enough for them than for me to share everything that has possibly went wrong with my mills since I've owned them for about 8 months. Now, while I let the mill warm up a little bit before we get started, I want to go ahead and tell you the very first thing that went wrong with my mill, and that is I broke a blade. Now, that's probably not all that uncommon, but it was partially because I didn't have the blade tracking set right. I was a new mill owner and I wasn't checking it regularly. I wasn't checking it as the blade went through heat cycles and heated up and those sort of things. And the blade tracking got off and it threw the blade off, and that caused it to jam up inside there. It tore the teeth off of the blade and scratched some things up inside the mill. It was not a very pleasant experience, but I also kind of chalked that up as probably at least mostly my fault. Since I've learned to keep an eye on blade tracking and kind of do a pre-flight check, make sure everything's in order, make sure the blade stays tight while I'm working, I've not had that problem since. So that's not one that I'm too concerned about. Now, the next thing that I broke is something that could easily happen while you're doing this part right here, pulling your slabs off the mill. Because when you pull your slabs off of the mill, of course, the end of it can still be back underneath here if you don't push the head all the way out of the way. And what I've noticed is that if you stop the mill with it just past the log, there's a component to your watering system that's a little bit vulnerable. That little plastic fitting right there is a push to connect fitting that you can put your water line in and it locks in place. And they're pretty neat little fittings, but they're plastic. And that can be easily broken. Now, I didn't break mine pulling slabs off of the mill. I actually broke it when I was setting the mill head on, and I think I had a strap wrapped around and had tension on it. I just wasn't paying attention, so I broke it. But the good news is, they have those on Amazon, and I bought like a 12-pack of fittings. So if I ever have one break again, I just screw one out, put a little Teflon tape on the new one, and slide it in there, and we're good to go. Not that big of a deal. Now the next problem, on the other hand, was a pretty big deal. So I hadn't had my SM26 for very long, and I was up here milling, and I noticed that the engine was getting louder. It wasn't very long before it got a lot louder because the exhaust pipe fell off. Now on that SM26, I had the pull start Rato engine, and the exhaust system was very similar to this setup right here on the Kohler, just 2 bolts through the exhaust flange, bolting it straight into the head. And when it fell off, I thought, no big deal. The bolts just weren't tight or didn't have Loctite or a lock washer or anything on them. So I'll grab some lock washers and throw the bolts back in it and be good to go. Well, I did that, and I wanted to get them good and snug so that they didn't fall out again. And the bolt broke off in the head. Now, that's probably partially my fault because I was trying to get them plenty tight, wasn't using any kind of torque spec, but I also feel like the quality of the bolts on that were maybe not the greatest. So that resulted in me having to stop for the night, drill out the bolt, and then drill out the head and put new threads in and put a bigger bolt in to hold the exhaust on. Now, a little bit of Loctite and lock washers and not over tightening the next set, it worked just fine, and I milled for a long time on it with no other issues. But that is something that shouldn't have happened and probably is a little bit of a quality control thing, but I think that MechMaxx has addressed that by offering lots of nice engine upgrades, including the Kohler 14-horse engine that's now available on their mills. Now the next issue actually involves one of these cranks. When I got my SM26, right out of the crate, when you would adjust the head, the mill head up and down, that handle, when you would crank it, it would squeak like crazy. And I tried oiling the handle itself and different things that were exposed, cranking it, and the squeak just never would go away. So I decided I was going to completely disassemble it until I got to the part that was squeaking. So I set the locks on my mill head, and then I loosened this up and took the cables off and started taking this apart. And what I figured out is you can take the entire arm out by just cranking it until it's all the way out. It will unthread itself all the way out to the end. And then inside there, there's a brass nut on one end and a threaded rod on the other end. And there was no lubricant on that. So I pumped the thing full of grease and put it all back together, and it was quiet ever since. So if you run into a squeak on your handle, that may be where you're headed. Now the next issue, which didn't really bother me, but it could be a safety issue, and that is when I first received my very first mill from MechMaxx, it was in the SM26, the emergency stop button was I noticed it was a little flimsy as I was putting it together, but when I hooked it up, it wouldn't actually function. So it wouldn't kill the engine. Now, me being me and knowing that I'm probably not going to use that anyway, I just disconnected it. I left it mounted on the handle and went ahead and put the mill together and operated without the emergency stop switch. Don't tell my sponsors. But there's a bigger issue with that one, because I brought that mill up here and I set it up, and I built this building, milling lumber, on that mill set up in this location. So I didn't have it undercover. I tried to throw a tarp over it when I could, but you know, a lot of people leave their mills sitting outside. Well, one day I decided I'm gonna get that box off of there, the emergency stop switch. I don't need that. So I got me a Phillips screwdriver, took that sucker off of there, and when you take the screws out, it comes apart. Well, I opened it up, and the whole box was filled with water. So it's not watertight. So if it had been working, it was going to malfunction being out in the weather, because the emergency stop buttons are just kind of cheap junk. And if you store your mill outside, you need to know that. So I had one final thing that was wrong with my mill. And this one is actually a little bit different and maybe a little bit interesting, because this is actually an experiment that I did so that I could illustrate that I want to know the full customer service experience, so I can share it with you guys and be totally transparent and totally honest. So if you follow my channel, you know that when I had the SM26, MechMaxx provided me with the 16-foot mill, so it would mill 10-foot logs, and I wanted to be able to mill longer logs. And I did the experiment where I ordered a mill extension from Woodland Mills to see if it would fit. And it did, and that worked great. So I could mill 16-foot long logs. Well, when they replaced that SM26 with the SM32, they sent me another 16-foot long mill, so I no longer had the capability of milling 16-foot logs. Well, rather than ask them to send me a free extension, I decided it would be worth the $339 to find out what kind of service I would get if I'm just anyone else off the street, so I can share it with you guys. So that's what I did. I got on MechMaxx.com, I used a different email address, and I placed an order for the 6-foot mill extension so I could extend my mill bed out to 16 feet. I was fully expecting for it to take a while for it to arrive and the communication to be lacking. And these are the kind of things that customers were telling me. And to my surprise, I got a total of 7 communication emails from MechMaxx over the course of the 6 days that it took my mill extension to arrive. Now, this was an in-stock item, so keep that in mind, because if you're doing a pre-order, then obviously you're gonna have to wait until they get them in the US to ship them out. But this was an in-stock item, and they got it to me a week faster than Woodland Mills got me my mill extension when I ordered from them. Not only was it faster, but they also communicated better because they were sending me regular updates on the shipping information, and it arrived a day sooner than they estimated. So that whole experience was fantastic. But my packaging arrived a little bit damaged, and because it was a little bit damaged, there were parts floating around inside there, and I had one missing piece. These little bars right here for the log dogs attached to a bracket that has a stub sticking out that goes inside this pipe. And I was missing one of these brackets. I knew that I could contact them and get them to send me a bracket and make things right, but I didn't want to wait. I had stuff I wanted to mill. I wanted to get this thing put on my mill. I had videos to make. So I just fabricated a bracket that works exactly the same as theirs does. I welded a stub on here that goes inside the pipe. It fits tight. It works exactly as it's supposed to. That solved my problem, and it didn't cost me any money. I had the scrap laying here, and I've got the tools and the welder and everything to do that. So that's how I dealt with that situation. But if you don't have those capabilities, that's a bigger problem for you. So you need to be aware that sometimes those things happen, and it happened to me. So guys, while I do have a list of things that went wrong or broke on my MechMaxx Sawmill since I've owned it, I don't feel like it's a very serious list. I don't feel like any of these are any major deal, and some of them are not even relevant because they don't use those parts anymore. So all of that being said, I'm trying to share with you my experience with a product so that you can make an informed decision, because this is not a mill for everyone. If you're used to using a Wood-Mizer or some other top-of-the-line mill, then you're probably going to have more complaints than I do, because I don't have experience running other sawmills. But what I do know is they shipped me a very affordable sawmill that anybody could operate, and it allowed me to take the trees off of my own property and build this sawmill shed, board and batten style lumber, and have a really good time doing it. Whether anybody wants to believe me or not, if I had paid the price that you're going to pay for one of these mills, I would still be satisfied with my purchase. I'm very happy with the value that I see here. And I can be pretty picky. I will also tell you that never has MechMaxx told me what to say or what I can't say or anything like that. Our deal was, I would like a sawmill that I can feature on my channel so that I can do these projects and share them with you guys. And they said, okay, where do we ship it? That's the extent of our agreement. I have no reason to not share with you these experiences. The fact of the matter is, my reputation is riding on the things that I'm saying about this company as well, because if I'm peddling junk and I'm telling you guys go out and spend your hard-earned money on something that is of no good to anyone, then it's not gonna be very long before you quit watching my channel. If nobody watches my channel, then I don't get to do this. And I love this. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Listen, if you're new to the channel and you're interested in sawmills, tractors, cabins, fishing, all the kind of things that you do outside, be sure and subscribe to our channel. It helps to support us, lets us continue doing what we're doing. Be sure and like our videos. And as always, until next time, get outside and enjoy God's creation, because it's beautiful out here. Y'all have a good day.